had to hold a microphone. So I'm really grateful to be here tonight. Thank you so much, especially to Bob Langley for inviting me and for facilitating tonight and making it such a pleasure and so easy. And also to Paul Engelmeyer, who has been such a champion of natural resource restoration and people, conversations like this one. I want to tell you the full title of my book. Just over there. See if I can remember it because it's kind of long. It's called The Parent's Guide to Climate Revolution. Yes, thanks for the reminder there. 100 Ways to Build a Fossil-Free Future, Raise Empowered Kids, and Still Get a Good Night's Sleep. And I'll tell you more about it as we go on. I feel like I'm far from you. Can I just get like this? Is that going to be okay for the videography?
Yeah.
Is that still okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I just also want to introduce, at the risk of getting in trouble later, my son here in the back row and his good friend Chloe, who were wonderful enough to jump in the car with me today when they heard I was speaking at the coast. They really want to come. So I'm just delighted that they're here because they're wonderful. So. The title is Why We Can Still Build a Livable, sometimes I say thriving future. On my down days I say livable future. And not that this is a down day, this is just what I made a couple weeks ago. I think it's important that we're honest about where we are in the climate crisis, and then after I kind of maybe give you some hard stuff, which you already probably know if you're even here to talk about climate. So I'm going to not spend a lot of time on that because I think it's important to spend a lot of time on positive solutions. So I'm going to be honest, and then we're going to move to all the ways that we can help one another and do it in ways that build community and build connections to the people that we love. So that's my purpose here tonight. I've done my gratitudes here, and just gratitude in general is a good thing to practice every day, so that's just a reminder for myself. A little bit about my background. I come from a family of 9 kids, and we lived in the country, and because I was the 6th out of 9, social justice became important to me. If you don't have 5 older siblings, then you might not really relate to that, but I had to learn how to speak up for myself early. And I also really was privileged to have such a beautiful place to grow up in that I was very connected to nature, thanks to my parents and where we lived. I moved to New York City to study and to work in the film and theater industry when I was in my, somewhere around 20. And I was really impressed by bread and puppet theater. Has anybody heard of bread and puppet theater? Okay, great. So not many people on the West Coast. So I got to work a little bit with them, and I loved the puppets and how they kind of, New York has these canyon-like spaces, right? These buildings, and these puppets would fill those spaces, and they were always so life-affirming and eye-catching and great for media and fun for people to build. So I really noted, when I lived in New York for 4 years, how people used the landscape there to talk about justice and politics and have very creative conversations. So that was kind of where I kind of learned how to engage with creativity and politics. Then I moved to Oregon to go to, I'm a harpist, and I went to the University of Oregon Music School, and then had these 2 cute kids. And I wasn't doing activism. This is in the 90s and then early 2000s. Wasn't really doing activism because at that point I understood that shrinking your carbon footprint and living green was the most important thing to do. Maybe because we weren't getting much traction under Bush, but that's where I was focused. But every year I would hear these reports, and it seemed like, Earth Day, everybody's shrinking their carbon footprint and businesses are going more green, but the reality wasn't quite matching up for me because of all the things we've all seen, where the temperatures are rising and the storms are getting worse and the droughts are getting worse and people are suffering, particularly in other countries, more. And at the same time, there was this quiet fossil fuel frenzy that was moving in around us, more and more infrastructure being put into place, more coal trains in the Northwest, more mountaintop removal, and then this sort of where did fracking come from, right? Like, it's somewhere around 2000, I don't know, 7 or 8, it became more in my consciousness, maybe even later than that. And it was never really this decision that, hey, we're going to have a huge energy boom, aside from the idea of the all of the above strategy that Obama did, which was really kind of code for let's do fracking, let's do more of everything, and yeah, let's do some solar too. And at the same time, the Keystone Pipeline was being, put into place at a time when the top NASA scientist, Dr. James Hansen, was saying it's game over for the planet. And that's what really got my attention, was this is not a far-off problem, it's now. And my own children are at risk. And as a mother, I just thought, well, you're going to mess my kid's planet up that badly over my dead body. And that's when, in 2000, I'll tell you what I did in a minute about that. So the U.S. now is the #1 producer of petroleum and gas. And we keep being told with every Earth Day and every, books about how to save the planet, it's always change your light bulbs and recycle. And there's a lot of focus now on ocean plastics, and people think somehow that that's directly related to doing something about the climate. And yes, there's a relationship, but pretty much everybody I talk to now who maybe wasn't so environmentally oriented a decade ago is all about plastics. So I'm trying to help people. Yes, it's important, we need to keep plastics out of the ocean, but we also really need to focus on the climate crisis, which is the number of parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. So again, people are being told to turn down their thermostats, hang their laundry, and bike. And a lot of people are not going to get on bikes. People live in cities, they live in cold cities, they live in cities where there aren't good bike paths, and we need to really be changing the conversation to what's happening with public policy. Meanwhile, people are focused on their own carbon footprints and creating this personal green infrastructure of, I'm going to bike, I'm going to have bamboo floors, I'm going to have everything recycled, and I don't know what's going on with policy or who my representatives are or how they're voting for the important things that actually affect the climate crisis. But that's what I speak about, that's what I wrote the book about. The important thing for us to know, as anybody here probably knows, is that the government is completely reshaping their energy policy and making it completely in the wrong direction, and having people like Rex Tillerson in the State Department. So that's what's happening now. But to tell my story, in 2007, I really heard scientists who were saying, your personal carbon footprint shrinking is not going to save the planet. We need a collective effort. We need to slash carbon emissions. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. And so that's when I started shifting to, okay, I'll do what I can on the personal level, but we have to shrink industry's footprint and their ability to buy Congress, who then is captive to the oil industry and then is shaping, the oil industry is essentially writing policy. So at that point, in 2007, 2008, I decided, as a busy mom, teaching music and raising kids, that I was going to work to change the system, not just change my light bulb. So that's when my family and I, mostly me, got political, starting with some protests, and I co-founded 350 Eugene with 2 other people, and started doing artwork on my front lawn, which was, this is the graveyard that we need. So it was things like mountaintop removal, death penalty, corporate personhood, a lot of the things that I thought needed to die, because at this time, this is maybe 10 years ago, whenever that was, 2008 or 10, we had a thing we have a very tight-knit neighborhood, and we all decorate for Halloween. Some kind of handmade thing, not just store-bought stuff. And this was mine. I'm gonna start making it more political. And that moved then into other art installations, which I did over the next 5 years. There were 13 installations, one after another, and they got a lot of attention over time. Like, you'll see them, they get bigger. But I thought it was an interesting way to have a new kind of conversation, because people could choose to ignore it or they could engage with it. We have a lot of schools around us, there's a lot of bike and walking traffic. And each one, after the first one, started to have an ask, something, not just to sort of make a statement, but to give you something positive that you could do about it. So this one was, support the plastic bag or the single-use bag ban that the city council was voting on, just to raise awareness. And then we gave away bags from a store that 2 stores gave me cloth bags to give away, and people could self-serve at the station. And there was a little pledge they could sign, and it was a very multi-step installation, and that moved into one about the Keystone Pipeline, where my kids and their cousins made handmade postcards, and we stamped them. We paid for the stamps. They were addressed to Obama at that time. And eventually this really did work. There were over 1 million comments at a key moment, and as you know, Obama did reject that pipeline, which is back up under Trump. But what really got my attention is something that I'm sure you're well aware of, and that is the Jordan Cove Pacific Connector pipeline and the terminal. And when I heard that they were actually seizing people's land using the power of eminent domain, that a Canadian corporation could use the power of eminent domain to seize private property and ram pipeline, through against people's will, I asked my neighbors, well, can I do that to your house? So this is when the first one that I did with support from 350 was I condemned 6 homes, all the homes on our block, and then we ran a life-size fake pipeline through. And it was in conjunction with an international law conference. We live right down the street from the law school, so it was in conjunction with an environmental law conference where we had a workshop on creative disruption with Bill McKibben and Mary Wood, who spoke here. I had several panelists, and we used this as an example. So this was kind of a side thing, and this is an example of creative disruption, but it ended up kind of getting legs of its own, and it got a statewide radio coverage for the whole 6 days of the installation, and a lot of TV coverage when we did the actual, we did kind of an art opening, we had snacks and wine, and kind of got a lot of publicity from that. But the neighborhood kids spoke on TV, and that was, you'll hear that this is starting to become a theme for me, is understanding what that does for young people. And they were, a lot of young people helped to design a selfie station where I didn't know anything about hashtags at this point, and some college kids on the block. I got to know everybody on the block, and they took different roles. The college kids was step aside, we have hashtags, and they really took on the social media part, and it ended up getting tweeted by Bill McKibben all over the world, and the result was pretty phenomenal, which was that overnight, for the first time, the Register Guard reported on this pipeline, and from that, a statewide coalition to resist the pipeline sprang up. So we had people from Portland and Coos Bay and Bend and through 350. So that was a wonderful impact of it. But it also united our neighborhood in a new way. And that was interesting for me, because then I really understood that when you do something creative and out of the box a little, and actually a little desperate, this is in a way my desperation. I poured myself into this, and my whole family helped. My husband built the pipeline. But it got attention overnight because it was so different. It was different than the usual ways that we engage with civics when we're opposed to something or for something. It got attention in a new way, and that's what I really noticed, was the media likes something different, but also it engaged people that weren't normally very engaged in environmental issues in my own neighborhood, and it engaged young people. So kind of thinking about that, we started a climate art camp for young people. It's in its 4th year this year, and that was for the 350 intern. And that's been a wonderful way to engage people with the arts and help them engage with each other. And they have a pool, they have baby goats, it's all out at a farm. And then the person who does this brought her first year's campers to an oil train protest in downtown Eugene. We have oil trains snaking through twice a week that are more explosive than the train that derailed and exploded in Lac Megantic and killed 47 people. Nobody knows when it's coming through, so first responders don't even know when it's coming through, and there are thousands of kids sleeping right in the blast zone. The University of Oregon dorms are right there by the railroad tracks. And we actually sleep in the glass, so we're farther away, like 11 blocks away. But that's something that we're trying to raise awareness about, is these potentially devastating oil drains. So then the next thing that happened in terms of our kind of the story I'm telling you, and then where we're going to go with it, is the very famous Juliana versus the U.S. So everybody, can I just see hands of people that know about the Juliana case, the 21 kids?
We actually had a program here.
You had who? Kelsey? Who?
Corey.
Oh, Corey, that's right, you said, okay. So Kelsey is a very close friend of my daughter. They went to, they've known each other since we were in a babysitting co-op together. And that's how the parents were in a babysitting co-op for little kids. And so we've watched this unfold over the last decade. And what it has done, aside from really educating me in a much more deep way about the potential for atmospheric trust litigation and for using the Constitution for claiming our right to a habitable planet, is that it, in Eugene, has created this wonderful network between activists, forest activists, and then those of us who were raising young people and active in 350 Eugene. So what ended up happening was 350 Eugene, which we had started, made a partnership with Our Children's Trust, and we started to do protests and rallies on the front porch of the courthouse steps with young people, using the arts and using advocacy for the young people. And this is the first big one, was some kids that I had spoken to about the pipeline. That's how they got here. And they were fifth graders whose teachers were wonderful, and they brought them, 60 of them, down to one of the first courthouse rallies. And their protest ended up getting on PBS NewsHour, so they had national coverage. But again, more important to me, as important, it was great to get that out there that far. But what really struck me was the teachers told me that summer, at the end of the year we asked the kids what the most important, what the highlight of the year was for them. And almost every single one of the 60 kids said, going out there and having that protest and expressing ourselves and having people listen. And that was really, again, instructive for me in terms of when we talk with young people about this devastating crisis that we have, they're happier when they can engage with it, and they can engage with real solutions, meaningful. They're asking for science-based solutions. We did some more things through 350 with young people. These are two of the plaintiffs in the Juliana case, and they spoke, and we walked downtown with some of the puppets that I hope I have one to show you. I designed something that was different, which was for the Paris climate talks in 2015. There was a call out internationally for protests, for rallies, for anything. Just let's join together to tell these world leaders, this is your hour. Please make a science-based binding treaty. You have a chance to do it now. So we asked for off fossil fuels and on clean energy. And these are all people here. So they're all, it took a long time to design this, but for me to figure this out, this was like a full-time job for the month before. But they're just oily plastic bags. And then underneath they have these white shirts. So film from above, it's on my website. You can see the film of the transition. It's pretty fun. From, off oil on clean energy. And people sang as they changed from the oil drip to the solar power there, like Here Comes the Sun and You Are My Sunshine. It actually made me cry. It was on a ladder, outside of the square. We had to square off the park and then hire these cameras to go up into the air, and I'm right outside with a megaphone, coaching them. Okay, now take the bags off. Okay, start. And then they all had sunflowers, and they were, from above, they were doing this to make it look like the sun is raining. And it is fun if you ever get a chance to go on my website and see the actual thing happening. But one of the things I wanted to show this because this was that Brennan Puppet Theater, puppet at the beginning that I was so inspired by in the 80s. I brought that to 350 and said, can we do stuff like that? And so I didn't help very much with this. It was beyond my artistic skill, but I helped design it. And so this is a 2-story puppet. This is huge and heavy, and it takes 3 people to work it. So one on each hand. The hands are huge, very heavy, and then there's a whole backpack structure in it, and it's really beautiful. It gets some good media attention. Here's another puppet that we made of Kate Brown when she wasn't yet against the Jordan Cove pipeline. And so this puppet ended up going all over the state to different rallies, and we would invite her sometimes, hey, will you come and speak against the Jordan Cove pipeline, or tell us what you're going to do for the people of Oregon to protect them from this nasty fossil fuel infrastructure. And if you don't come, we actually have a substitute, so it's your choice. And so often she would come, and then 18 months later, after a concerted campaign, people went to her office with the puppet. And here she's actually shutting down the actual office of the office of, the Federal Energy Regulation FERC in Portland. So for 2 hours there was a sit-in, and she condemned them. And 18 months after this protest, she came out, the real Kate Brown came out against the Jordan Cove pipeline. So things like this change, they engage a different segment of the population. It reaches new people when you use humor and you use creativity. Everybody likes puppets. And then we decided, well, puppets are heavy. Let's go a little simpler here. Let's get, an earth that can be carried. So this is for one of the many hearings done at the federal courthouse in Eugene. So 350 bought, an earth, and the kids marched with it. Actually, Forrest even marched in one of them, right? Down one of the big ones. And the symbolism of that, I think, is beautiful. It's heavy. It's really hard to control. And here these young people are, hundreds of them walking from their high school, having to work together to keep this kind of fragile thing from hitting the ground for an entire mile. So that was just beautiful to see, and I have that on my website too, some of those. So the take-home message for me, again, after all of these events, is that when we are truthful with young people, when we give them something to do, we give them a platform, we give them a microphone, we give them, the honest, depending on how young they are, you get more honest the older they get, because you have to shield the younger ones from some of the brutality of the situation that we're in. But there are ways that and in my book I talk about how to talk about different age groups so that they stay empowered and engaged all the way. But the key is to give them a way in that works for them. And this is where parents started to ask me, well, do you have like 5 or 10 things that I can do? I can't do what you're doing. You're clearly obsessed with all this. Because I was doing it pretty full time. I guess I still am. But people were inspired, and I started making this list of the 5 or 10 things, and then it became 100 things. I actually had about 150, but had to cut it down at some point, had to stop it. And so what the book is it's got 8 different sections. Some of them are about saving time and money, which you kind of need to do if you're, as I was, which was, really home with with my kids, and also wanting to do activism. It's really hard to do both and to be able to still meet your family's financial needs. So we lived really cheaply. We're kind of at the end, that my youngest is going off to college, but for the 24 years, the last 10 years, it's been really a challenge to live simply and still meet our needs, the rising costs of medical and educational needs that each family has. And so I felt it was important to help families find a way to keep expenses low so they could do this important work, because nobody's paying you to be an activist for the most part. So there are 8 different sections. The biggest one is Build a Fossil-Free Future. There are other ones about caring for your soul. There's some viewing climate in a new light so you can understand what some of the issues are. And then each chapter ends, they're each just 2 pages. There's the occasional 3-pager, but most of them are 2 pages, nice and short. All stories of me or my friends. How are we busy? The busiest people I know are parents with kids still at home. So how do these busy people wrap in living well, living in a meaningful way, and living connected, but also really fighting for a livable planet? And so that's what these stories are. And each one at the end has 3 to 15 ways to wrap it into your life. And some of them are like, if you have 1 minute, here's an idea, if you have 5 minutes, if you have 5 hours. Sometimes it's $1, $10, $50. So there's a way in for everybody of any economic level or time level, energy level. So what I'm trying to do now in this time after the book is out is trying to mobilize people who are busy and help people find ways to wrap it into their busy lives, and also to tap into that adult instinct. We all, even if we don't have children, we care about the future. What else are we here for on this planet, if not to celebrate what we've been given and to make sure that we have a beautiful, healthy, sustainable planet for the people who follow. I'm not sure why anybody would want anything else out of their lives. That's the legacy that each of us wants to leave, I think, is a place that's better than what we were gifted with. So why did I name it Climate Revolution? That's the next section I want to go into is, so what is it we're trying to do here? What I consider revolution is, if you have a system that doesn't work, then you want to create a new one. That's basically the definition of revolution. And our system isn't working. It's completely broken because we're brought to this precipice where we are looking at near-term human extinction. We're looking at the collapse of species. We're looking at water disappearing. We're looking at rising temperatures and all the things that you already know. So what I'm fighting for is sweeping policy change, and that includes things like, women's literacy, protecting the forest, restoring watersheds, changing agriculture, changing how we talk about it in our schools, and creating climate literacy in the classrooms, and stopping fossil fuels and investing in clean energy. So that's what the goal is. These are really informed by the book Drawdown. Do people know that book? Let me see hands of. So only just maybe 5 or 6. So that's a great book to put on to get. It's a Drawdown. It's edited by Paul Hawken, and the subtitle is something like The Most Comprehensive Plan to Reverse Global Warming Ever. And it's kind of gone viral. It's a big bestseller now. And it came out just a couple months before my book was due. And I actually threw out 5 of my chapters and inhaled this book because it's a science-based approach for what things can we do to draw down the legacy carbon in the atmosphere. So it's a very unusual book because it was 50 scientists over 5 years, and they only put things in the book that you can model and measure. So for example, the number one thing that they found that would help draw down legacy carbon is to manage refrigerants. Like, really? Because those chemicals are so volatile and they're so easily released into the atmosphere because millions of people have them as air conditioners and refrigerators, which people are buying more of as the planet heats up. So it's a wonderful book to kind of like, women's literacy is number 4. That's a big climate recovery move, and each one it's very well written. They're beautiful pictures, and they have these numbers of this is how many billions of dollars it will cost. This is how many trillions usually it will save. So it's all modeled versus versus something you can't model. There's a lot of hypotheses out there. And an interesting note is when someone asked him in an interview, well, what isn't in the book? And he said war. War is actually the single biggest climate hog of all human activities, but you can't model it. You can't measure it, so I didn't put it in the book. So, Drawdown. That's a good one to look at. Okay, so how is the climate revolution going? Last fall, how many people read a synopsis of the UN report, the IPCC report about, hey, we've got till 2030 to reverse this, or we're gonna pass irreversible tipping points. And of course, that doesn't take into account, the methane, the permafrost. It doesn't take into account. Greta Thunberg speaks about this. It doesn't take into account that we need to have global equity conversations. But still, okay, so more of the bad news. A few months ago, there was a devastating report about the loss of our pollinators. from mostly pesticides. And these things are creating a perfect storm, right? If you have, we're losing water, more pesticides, more pollinator loss at the same time that, temperatures are rising. This is from Nebraska. I was there speaking this spring, about a week after this. And then we've got Trump, loving coal. And the Paris Climate Agreement, even though a lot of people are on the global level and on the state level are saying we are in, it doesn't matter what Trump's doing. The fact is there is now a measurable effect on the global resolve to uphold those agreements without the U.S. carbon emissions rules. So here's the bad news. This guy is a friend of fossil fuels. We have a pretty negative trend going. I couldn't put up a second photograph of him. I just don't want to look at Trump any more than I have to, honestly. So this one is just April 10th, he signed an executive order, as you probably know, expediting pipelines so that there can be energy dominance, which is completely backwards. So here's the good news. And this is, to me, the most important thing that keeps me going, is that James Hansen has a prescription that you heard about from Coriel when he was here speaking. The three main things: slash emissions, which means stop burning fossil fuels for the most part, plant 1 trillion trees, which, by the way, Plant for the Planet is trying to do. It's a group. Does everybody know about Plant for the Planet? It's a group of, started in Germany. It's a group of kids. On a global level, there are thousands of global ambassadors, and what they say is stop talking, start planting. Felix Finkbeiner was 9 years old when he started it, and he said, "You've been talking about climate recovery my whole life and you haven't done anything. So we're going to plant 1 trillion trees, and we're going to get it done while the adults are still talking." So that's probably based in part on this prescription. And then change agriculture. This is, these are short little things, but obviously each one of them has many implications for what needs to be done. But to me, the important line in that IPCC report is difficult but doable. And that's what the media did not focus on. A lot of the media said, well, we're doomed. Well, it's humanity's fault. Or it's your fault because you drive a car. Or it's your fault because, you didn't do anything 10 years ago. And I think this is the important thing that we need to focus on, is that scientists are saying it can still be done. It requires revolution. They're using words like radical, revolutionary change, major transformation. But the important thing is, when people are getting kind of down about it, is to remind them, or remind ourselves, that Dr. Hansen and other top climatologists who've been really looking at this problem for decades are saying we can still pull it off. Some other positive parts are, I think, to look at are how there are so many co-benefits to climate recovery. All the solutions that benefit the planet also benefit human health. If you're not burning fossil fuels, then you're not making kids in Beijing unable to go outside, or other cities where we can hardly breathe outside. It's better for our local resilience, it's better for our economies, it's better for democratic representation, where we're not driven and captive, all of the three branches of our government, by the fossil fuel industry. So I think this is the important thing that I keep saying, is what's good for the planet is good for democracy, it's good for families, it's good for our health. So here are some of the zero waste. I just went to Europe to kind of look at some of the ways they're living, and the cities, livable cities, and how that compares to what we're doing here. And I just got back, so I haven't even incorporated a lot of my photos, but there's so much more going on, as you probably know, there in terms of transportation and zero waste housing, composting on a municipal level. Another win-win is that local small-scale solar and wind power are good for energy independence, and especially in impoverished countries where they don't have the same kind of grids, and then those grids get knocked out easily, if they do have them, by the storms that are increasing. So this is a wonderful low-cost way to create self-sufficiency, which is an argument that helps conservatives get behind renewable energy. It's a can-do, independent way of approaching our needs for energy. It's also another argument for clean energy, is that it's better for those that work in the industry. Also, people don't fight wars over wind and solar and wave power. It's free and abundant. Wind is the cheapest energy to come online, and this is important to push back right now against Trump's springtime assault on wind energy. The wind potential in just 3 states, according to Drawdown, can meet all of our needs for energy, for electricity, from coast to coast. Those 3 states are, let's see, it's up there. Kansas, Texas, and North Dakota, because the wind is so constant. The other thing that's really important to focus on is the discovery mode that people are in at this point. There's so much innovation. For example, there was a South African woman who created some kind of high-tech fabric that can harvest the wind in subway tunnels in London. And those are the kind of things that there's more investment in. Well, I want there to be more investment in, but when we invest in young people and in that out-of-the-box thinking, we were able to come up with so many more innovations. Batteries are improving, molten salt tanks, that's what this is. These are changing the game for solar energy and its ability to give back its energy over time. So these are heated during the day, and then when it's dark, they can radiate their electricity, the heat and electricity out when it's dark. Another thing that gives me hope is that other countries are really getting onto solar. In China, they build the equivalent of 1 soccer field per hour, and they're doing it in really whimsical ways. Little different animals that you can see from the air. The other thing that's a good trend is the divestment campaign that's going internationally. The International Monetary Fund has divested, the Rockefeller brothers, whole California's retirement system, their whole state, New York State, divested, and that is growing. That's thanks to 350.org, and Bill McKibben started that in 2012. The other thing that's really positive is that going into the Paris climate talks, the whole world was talking about 2 degrees as an allowable amount of warming, which was never based in science, it was based in politics. But because activists were so loud there, they brought a delegation, YAAS brought a delegation from Marshall Islands, and they really had a platform there. And 1.5 to stay alive became this rallying cry, and the world, look at this is as the end of it. 1.5 degrees as the new acceptable norm, amount of warming, but that, for the decade before that, wasn't even considered politically feasible. So again, activism was as a key part in raising people's consciousness about what the 2-degree warming actually meant was a death warrant for small island nations. Another thing that I think is an important trend to acknowledge is that in September, 60 different news outlets in their roar every week have committed to a week of covering climate at a much higher level. The Guardian was a newspaper, kicked off that campaign. And restoration efforts have been discovered to be much more powerful at sequestering. So here, this new study found that 21% of the United States greenhouse gas pollution could be removed. So again, that drawdown concept through enhanced management of forest, grassland, agricultural, and coastal areas, which is what a lot of you already know, and Paul has been really pushing for years on the work that he's doing. So I think that's another positive piece. Climate arts are flourishing, people are more aware than ever, and people are more, even conservatives, are more supportive than ever of climate action. Another important thing to notice is when we fight, we win, which is why the Northwest has been called the thin green line, where energy projects go to die. Either mostly because of civic activism, not a single one of the dozens of new or expanded fossil fuel infrastructure projects have been built since 2012, since this attempt to bring it all, to expand it all so much. Another thing that gives me hope, and I have a chapter about this called Be the 3.5%, is that there's some recent scholarship that it takes only 3.5% of people to be actively engaged in a nonviolent campaign for that campaign to succeed, particularly when like that slide 2 slides ago, when people are behind, in general, supportive of that policy change. So that gives me a lot of hope, even though I know we have a really destructive trend right now with the current administration and the ways that they're eroding our democratic, the ideals and the ways that we are governed of the people, by the people, for the people, through the gerrymandering and voter suppression and stealing Supreme Court seats and such. It's serious. Our democratic crisis is very real. But what's also true is that when we fight, we do win. And the Sunrise Movement has been a really important reminder to me that when we go in with activism and we disrupt business as usual, things change, conversations change. In Nebraska, when I was there, farmers and ranchers are still building solar farms in front of the Keystone Pipeline pathway, so that gives me hope. The flipping of the house, that was not just a given. That took a lot of hard work. It was so many individuals like you and me. And then her election, AOC's election, and then the introduction of the Green New Deal has been a game changer. And again, the Sunrise Movement has helped facilitate that conversation. Greta Thunberg, does everybody know about Greta, the 16-year-old girl from Sweden? She's completely changed the conversation and is up for a Nobel Peace Prize because she's so blunt and straightforward and has such moral high ground in the climate crisis conversation. And millions of students are joining her strikes. There's a big one on September 20th coming up worldwide, and they're asking adults to join them by walking out of work. So that's just something to put on your calendar. Watch what's coming in your community. This is the first day of the new Congress. The Green New Deal campaign began with 150 or 200 kids, young people getting arrested, demanding a Green New Deal. And that really changed the conversation. Something else in new scholarship is that if we can get climate literacy into the schools, particularly middle grade classrooms, middle school classrooms, that reaches the parents and the families more. So in terms of reaching with good information, a larger percentage of the population that might be kind of veered off into Fox News land. Again, through young people, through people caring about young people. When young people come to you and say, the adults seem to be trashing my planet and I'm scared, that's really different than them seeing, somebody like me holding a sign downtown. So that's why I'm doing this work in part, and I wrote the book is to help parents demand climate literacy in the classroom. And that spreads to other families and to other community members and to even the workplace when you start having those conversations coming from children who are asking for nothing more than a livable future, nothing more than the kind of clean air and clean soil and clean water that we have growing up. The young people, again, Sunrise Movement, have convinced, I think it's more than 12 now, of the candidates to sign an agreement that they're not going to take any fossil fuel money during the presidential campaign, that's a big deal. They're bringing the conversation into multiple lanes. They're demanding a climate debate, and the Democratic Party is going to vote on this in August. So one of the campaigns they're asking is for us to ask our representatives to vote for a climate debate next month. And you can go on Sunrise and see all the ways that they're asking us to support them. The British Parliament declared a climate emergency. This is thanks to the Extinction Rebellion and to young people. And the climate emergency is something, it's gaining traction as a thing, rather than talking about climate change, it's the climate emergency. One of the things I think that's important to remind all of us, does everybody know what this depicts here? What this is? Usually it's only about 5 or 6 seconds. This is an escape room. And have you heard of these escape rooms? It's this really big thing now. When you have a family reunion and you want something to do, you go downtown and there are these places where you get locked in a room with your family or with your friends, and you have to solve all these clues together to escape from this room. It's like a game Clue or something. You have to figure it out together. And the reason people enjoy this is because they have a challenge, they're working together, it's kind of fun, it's a little bit edgy, and this to me seems like exactly what we have. We have a massive escape room, people. Let's work together, let's make it fun, let's make sure that we're working with one another to get out of this crisis that we're in. And to remind people that it's fun, challenges are fun. We don't have to just look at it and say it's overwhelming, but say we can do this, we can work together. It's a long shot, but we can do it. I've heard it called our generation's moonshot, climate recovery. John F. Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon, and it seemed crazy at the time. It was 1961. Do you know how many years it was before we had a man on the moon?
8 years.
8 years. So we have 11 years, supposedly. We'll see. It might be a little shorter than that. All right. So I promised you easy ways that busy people can help, that you can do yourselves. You can encourage other people to do. So here's a menu of possibilities, and that's what I say about my book. The hundreds, more than 100, because each chapter has several. There are, I don't know, maybe 1,000 ideas in there. But it's not a to-do list, because those just overwhelm people, especially when people are busy. So the first thing is to cut down on TV. So I have chapters with some science about the impact of watching TV and watching hours of TV, both on young people and on all of us over time. There's some new, scholarship about the effect on our brains over time and our cognitive abilities if we watch more than 2 hours of TV a day for decades. One of the things that I'd like to talk about is, I've already kind of hinted at it, the idea of blame and shame in this climate conversation. There's a lot, as I said earlier, about, well, I'm doing this. People often come to me and say, well, I'm getting rid of I'm getting rid of my front lawn. I'm going to have only native plants. Or I'm doing this campaign at work where we're all going to recycle. Or, a lot of really earnest and well-intentioned things. And sometimes that can spiral into, I'm talking to my sister-in-law about how she eats meat, or I'm, trying to get my brother to not drive as much, or I'm trying to not drive as much myself, or all these individual focused, small carbon footprint measures to reduce it, which are all good. But again, the most important thing, I think, is for us to recognize that it really is not our fault. It's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not my fault. We're captive within a fossil fuel infrastructure. And that infrastructure has been created and maintained by government policies. And yes, there are times when we could probably bike, and maybe we should do that instead of walking. But a lot of people like me, I can't bike. I'm full of metal. I have metal in my body. I'm not going to bike. I can't. I'm physically unable to. And that's true for a lot of people. So we don't want to have it be this, you have to be an eco-superhero in order to mitigate the climate crisis. What we need to do is change policies. So I think one thing I encourage people to do is to stop looking around at what other people are doing or blame yourself, but really look at the big picture. Because when you have an emergency, you have different levels of emergency. Sometimes you can prevent it, and you can do small things, and you can do things on your own. But sometimes, Greta Thunberg says it, and actually it's there's a Sun magazine over there. There's just a couple left. But it's my interview with Kathleen D. Moore, and it's entitled, If Your House is on Fire. And Kathleen talks about when your house is on fire, you have to actually get everybody involved, and you have to put the fire out. You have to stop the harm. You can't sit back and study it. You can't sit back and say, well, I'm going to only eat vegan. You have to actually put the fire out. And there are times when it's time for prevention, and there are times when it's time to fight alarm fire. We need to work together. So that's just something that's, I have a couple left if you want to see that interview with Kathleen D. Moore. It's also online, as is the other Sun magazine has a newer interview with Mary Wood about the Juliana case. Again, also online. You don't need to buy it. But some people like to have the magazines are beautiful. So the reason I bring up the if your house is on fire is I think we really need to recognize the emergency that we're in, and that, again, our diets and how we drive are not going to make nearly as much of an impact as stopping these fossil fuel infrastructures. Trump has 100 new fossil fuel projects that he's trying to lock in right now in these next few months which locks our children into decades of planet-killing fossil fuel projects, dirty energy, bad for their health, going to tank the planet, and it's bad for our economy. So right now, the focus has to be on stopping Jordan Cove, on stopping whatever's in your neighborhood, on protecting trees, changing forestry. And that feels overwhelming sometimes to people, but again, I'm going to give you some easy ideas, and the book is full of easy ideas, and there are different groups like Citizens Climate Lobby or the Watershed group and 350. Find your people, find something that you can do. It doesn't have to be big, but it's better to do something with other people. All right, that's essentially what I just said. One little factoid here that I think is really important in the conversation about clean burning natural gas. I was just in San Francisco yesterday, and there was a garbage truck, beautiful green, brand new paint, and it had all these wonderful, earthy things on it, and it said, "We're using only 100% clean burning natural gas." And the person I was with said, "Isn't that great?" Because I was stopping to take a picture. I was like, "Wait, you guys, I know we're in a hurry, but I gotta take a picture." So they're thinking I'm taking a picture of it because it's so wonderful that the garbage trucks are using, clean burning natural gas. So then when I said, "No, this is actually complete BS," so between that moment and when we finally got to where we were going, 10 minutes later, I gave them a whole lecture about, that's fracked gas we're talking about. It's not clean burning. It's worse than coal in many ways. And the thing that I think in terms of, if you take one thing from tonight, because fracking is starting to move into Oregon, it's this part right here. So natural gas fracking uses 28 times as much water as the natural gas that I used when I bought my house and thought it was clean burning 20 years ago. That's conventional. That's not happening much anymore. Fracked gas uses 9.6 million gallons of water per well. It uses it to extinction. You can't use that water. It's being taken out of our water supply. It's gone, and it's being injected deep into the ground where it's often causing earthquakes. It's obscene to take that water out at a time when we're running out of water. So if for no other reason to be opposed to fracked gas, it's that one right there. It's using up our water. Then you can get into other things like it's destroying the climate because methane escapes, and it's being done near schools, which means benzene and countless chemicals. They don't even have to tell you what chemicals they're using, are being inhaled by children during the school day as they're going out for a healthy recess. So learn about fracking and see what's coming into Oregon. So again, one thing that's simple that we can do is to name the climate crisis. Climate change was a term invented by Republican PR people because change is good, right? Climate change, it's always been changing, and you see that kind of conflating, the climate crisis with the idea that the Earth has gone through different iterations of, ice and heat and over time. But the climate is being destroyed. It's not changing. That makes it sound like it's doing it on its own. The climate is being actively destroyed by people who are knowingly ruining our kids' futures. And I think we need to really start calling it that. Climate destruction, environmental destruction, destruction of nature. Okay, another thing that's helped me a lot is I can only take in a certain amount of news. Doing this work full time, I can only take a certain amount. And GRIST sends out, that's a funny one, Climate Connections. Every week has not only kind of the important news, the science news, but it also has the good news, which I need. Climate Wire saying GRIST has funny every day. It comes out with the beacon, so it starts with good news, which sometimes is all I can read. There's one beacon and then 3 bits of smog. So, the good news and 3 bad. And sometimes I can really only read the beacon because it's just an off day. Another easy thing you can do to revoke the social license of investors who are now doubling down on things like the Keystone Pipeline or the Dakota Access Pipeline. Chase is the number one, JP Morgan Chase is the number one investor of fossil fuels on a global level. So if you have one of their credit cards, consider switching to a local credit union or a different bank These three are also bad: Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citi. The four of them are the top investors on a planetary level in destructive pipelines. Every new project, pretty much these guys are in on it. I encourage people, I have a chapter called Remove the Gag, and it's about how, we kind of feel like, oh, we can't talk about the climate, it's too controversial, and I'm saying rip the gag off at this point. And use your relationships to talk about what you care about. We have every right to talk about the well-being of the people that we love, the next generation, with our doctors, with their teachers, with the pastor at the church, with the rabbi, with the pediatrician, with the next door neighbor. People want our children to thrive, and that's often a way into the conversation for me, whether it's, when you have children, or if you're grandparents, that's when there's a huge network of people around who care. No matter what their political affiliations are, they really do honestly care, I find, about my kids' well-being. And so when I speak about it from that point of view, that I'm worried about my children, I'm really worried. That's why I'm doing this as a volunteer. It's a different way into the conversation when you talk about love and protection. So that's just one thought, is to use that angle in rather than going straight from politics, but just my own fear. And if someone were to tell me, you know what, if the scientists tell me it's going to be okay, then I wouldn't be coming at it with such passion. But what the experts are that actually have the credibility in this conversation are saying is that it's not going to be okay. And until they say otherwise, I'm going to work full time to protect the planet. And you can't really argue with that from any political point of view. We have a health crisis, we have an environmental crisis, and coming at it from that point of view, I find I can talk to just about anybody about it, because it's about life and about protecting life. So one thing we can do is just keep talking about wind. There's a wonderful book called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. I think there's a movie too, I haven't seen it, but this book is in like little kid format, picture book. It's a young reader and it's an adult version and a movie. And it's really inspiring. And it's, again, shows how simple wind is, and how accessible it is, and how important it is for a clean energy future. One thing I like to remind people to do, if you're not an outgoing person, you don't want to do straightforward activism, thank the people who are out front, because there are a lot of us out here and it can get lonely and tiring sometimes. So write a letter to somebody who's just, spoken out in public. Do a public gratitude in a newspaper for someone who is standing up to the fossil fuel industry or to Trump, or introducing, Oakland is doing some wonderful zero waste lunches. So those kind of initiatives, it's really good to support the people, teachers who are bringing good climate science into the classroom, or administrators who are bringing composting into the schools. Another thing that I like to do a lot is interrupt despair, because I find people often spend a lot more time talking about what's wrong and why we're not going to fix it, rather than on, hey, let's think of 3 things that we can do in the next 24 hours, even if it only takes us half an hour in those 24 hours. Let's think of 3 things we can do, and let's talk about it together, rather than, a long conversation about why we're doomed. This is one of the big campaigns now, is the Green New Deal. 104 Congress people are co-sponsoring it, so it's happening. This did not happen a year ago. This is all brand new. Support clean energy candidates. There are going to be a lot of them in the next election, but do it publicly if you can, even if it just means one handmade sign stuck in your car or on your bike or on your front porch. Often the handmade ones get a lot more attention. Just seems like anything that takes more care, whether it's showing up at someone's office or making a handmade sign, energy in usually gets a better response. And if you're despairing or burned out, dance with your friends or sing, take a break. And then I have a section here, I'll just go kind of quickly, for amplifying youth voices, is to introduce young people to the Juliana plaintiffs, introduce them to our Children's Trust. If you have young people in your life who are feeling overwhelmed by what's coming, introduce them to Sunrise or to Greta Thunberg's work, because she really fires people up. And whenever you can, give them the microphone. This is a protest that we had, young people do a theater piece, and then they actually led the protest. and they led the chants for an hour. There's more and more happening in terms of protests with young people, bring them sandwiches. One of the things I asked Katia Juliana, who's the mother of Kelsey Juliana, was, well, what could you, if there's one thing that you want people to know in terms of what to do or not do when amplifying youth voices, she said, don't put them on a pedestal. People are often putting the weight of the world on kids' shoulders, and they're still kids. They're still learning how to launch themselves in the world, and they're still making sense of it as teenagers. So please just let them do what they need to do in the world, and don't put too much pressure on them, or tell them that they're these amazing heroes. They're just kids trying to fight for their future. You can fund art camps, anything that gets kids connected to empowerment and expression of their ideas, and then get them off screens and out helping Paul, planting trees and restoring riparian areas. Get hands on things. And I'll just end a couple more left to remind people. Sometimes it can feel like, when I'm speaking this quickly and throwing out this many ideas, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just join. There's so many wonderful campaigns going, so many initiatives at this point, so much resistance. Just find the one that resonates for you, and just do a couple of things. Push the wheel along, don't reinvent it. And the other thing I like to say is stay together. Remember that where we are in history is it's the we generation. We have to do a coordinated response. There's the people that are actively destroying the planet and destroying democracy are very well organized and very well funded. But people power, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, they may have big money. They may have big bunnies too. They may have big money, but we have big organizing. And that's the important thing to remember, is that in the end, love goes a long way. And I'll end on this quote from the movie The Martian, or from the book. At some point, so he's, have you seen this movie? Who's seen this movie?
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil it for those of you who haven't, but just forget this part. He's asked at the end, how he did it, how he got through. He's abandoned on Mars. He has to create an atmosphere. He has to feed himself if he's ever going to, be around in a year when the ship has a chance to come back and pick him up. And this is what he tells people. At some point, everything's going to go south on you, and you're going to say, this is it. This is how I end. Now, you can either accept that, or you can get to work. That's all it is. You just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, and you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. And that's how I feel about where we are in the climate crisis, is that people often kind of sit back and say, well, is it going to work if I do anything? Is it really going to matter? Are we really going to solve it? Is it possible? And it is, yes, scientists are saying it's possible. And maybe we don't know, maybe we're holding a little candle here. We can see one step. We don't really know how we're going to quite do it, but then we can see a place to put the next step. One problem, then another. Let's get the low-hanging fruit right now. Let's stop, let's transition off of dirty energy to clean. Let's do all the things that we know how to do already with the technology we have. I have a chapter about geoengineering and how so much of it is based on fantasy and injustice. We have technology, it's called trees. It pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and locks it into the soil. And that, again, Paul's doing that work. So remind people of that. We have the technology. We have the willpower. We just need to work together. So that's what I have. Please ask any questions if you like, and make any comments, and then I can sign books if you want any, and then you can look at the Sun magazine, or you can find it online, the interview with Mary Wood about the climate crisis, and then what do you think?
Well, as you so aptly pointed out, what more would anybody want to do than leave a clean environment for the next generation?
So, I'm sorry, I'm hearing it here. Can you say the beginning part again?
Yeah.
Again?
As you so aptly pointed out, what more would anybody want to do other than leave a clean environment for the next generation? What insights do you have into why the people empower, fossil fuel companies, don't they understand that they're part of the same future? It just seems logical, but, yeah, but, even so, no matter how much money you have, you still need an environment that's livable.
Not all
right?
people agree with that.
Agreed.
Wonderful question. I think a lot of people wonder about that. Even if you, I don't know, at this point, how can you not know that you're destroying your own children's chances for survival? The oil industry has known about what burning fossil fuels would do since the 60s. I think in here somewhere in my book I said the 80s. I didn't realize it was in the 60s that they knew what they were doing, and then actively lobbied and obfuscated and confused the question, forestalling our ability to really make an appropriate response in time to avoid all the drama that we're going to have if we're going to transition quickly. So I don't know that question. I have wondered it myself, and Kathleen D. Moore tells a story about how she was at something where there was an oil industry representative, and afterwards she was walking out with him, and she was asking the same thing. She said, "Don't you have children?" And she said, he turned to her and said, "Don't you ever, ever, ever underestimate the power of the oil industry." That was the response. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe they think that they're going to have the money to create a biosphere. What was that thing that they had in the 80s or 90s, like Bio 1 or something? Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that often. What's that?
It didn't work out so well.
It didn't work out right. Yeah, for a lot of reasons. Yeah, I mean, nature's pretty amazing, and it can't be replaced. So I'm not sure maybe those Mars fantasies. So I have a chapter about that, interrupting the Mars fantasy. It drives me crazy that kids' science magazines will have, entertain the whole Mars question as if it's really realistic to try to build an atmosphere a million miles away instead of fixing with the very straightforward solutions that we have. Not easy, but straightforward solutions. We have straightforward solutions at this point. Change agriculture, plant a trillion trees, stop burning fossil fuels, invest in all the solutions and in conservation and women's empowerment. So I don't know. Anybody else have ideas why? we all think about this at night. Like, why do they want to trash the planet? Why would anybody want to? I don't know. But this is where we have moral authority. As people who love wildlife, as people who love the earth, as people who care about the justice of other nations, where the people who have the least responsibility for the climate crisis are paying the greatest price. People are dying. This is real. People are losing their homes, they're losing their lives. And I don't know why anybody's here knowing this if they're not working for solutions in whatever way they can. I don't know.
Thank you very much. I really have enjoyed this because you've given us some just really good practical things to do. And we do have some kids in this area that have gotten involved in the school thing. Yeah, so that's been really, really great. And I would encourage you to buy your book, and we could certainly use help in putting the chairs away. Thank you for that little extra thing I got in.
Oh, you're welcome.